Our scripture lesson is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 12. As we continue to follow Samuel through his life. Some people have tried to call this Samuel's farewell speech, but he's not ready to leave completely. He's simply changing roles. And so we have these words in this speech that he gives to the people. It's one that kind of really points to, he challenges people to show if there's any way that he's been unfaithful and without using his integrity as a way of serving God. So 1 Samuel chapter 12. And Samuel said to all Israel, behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you've said to me and have made a king over you. Now, look, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray. And behold, my sons are here with you. I've walked before you from my youth until this day. Here I am, testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes? Testify against me, and I'll restore it to you. They said, you've not defrauded us, or oppressed us, or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. And they said, he is witness. And Samuel said to the people, the Lord is witness who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now, therefore, stand still that I may plead God's case with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds of the Lord that he performed for you and for your forefathers. When Jacob went into Egypt and the Egyptians oppressed them, then your fathers cried out to the Lord, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers up out of Egypt and made them dwell in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hatzor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab. And they fought against them. And they cried out to the Lord and said, we've sinned because we've forsaken the Lord, and we have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, that we may serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, and Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side. And you lived in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord was your king. The Lord your God was your king. And now, behold, the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you. If you'll fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Now, therefore, stand still and see this great thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not the wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord that he may send thunder and rain. And you shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which you've done in the sight of the Lord, and asking for yourselves a king. So Samuel called upon the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins this evil, to ask for ourselves a king. And Samuel said to the people, don't be afraid. You have done all this evil. Yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside after empty things that cannot profit or deliver, for they are empty. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great namesake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. And I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart, and consider what great things he's done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. May God add his understanding to this reading from his word. Not long ago, I had a conversation with a man who knows that his days are numbered. He's been fighting, or he was fighting, his cancer for some time, and he's realizing that he's getting to the end stages. And so he began to do some life review. He started off, he led with, I've been very selfish. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me more. You know, that's what chaplains sometimes do. They invite more to get the person to talk about what they need to talk about. But everything he recounted, it sounded like he did a pretty good job in life. And I was like a little bit puzzled by this. But at some level, I suspect that he knows things that he didn't feel free to say. Every morning when we get up, we look in the mirror and we see the face looking back at us, don't we? And if we haven't done our job to take care of our appearance, it might be a little scary sometimes. The hair's a little wild or whatever. But the more important thing is to see what's behind the face, what's in the heart of the person that's looking back at you in the mirror. And Samuel seemed to know this. Samuel was a man after God's heart. He truly loved God. I believe he had a friendship with God. His ears were continually open. He wanted to know what God wanted of him and what God wanted of the people. And when it was even risky, and we'll see that perhaps in the next week's message more than ever, when there was risk to his personal safety, he still spoke truth to power. He was a man of integrity, and what God said is what he would speak to the people. You get this sense, though, that he's really a little bit hurt, that he's been leading God's people faithfully for many decades of his life. He's probably, I don't know how old he is, it doesn't tell us. Imagine he's in his 70s, and he's served God faithfully, and when the people get under pressure, they cry out for a new form of government instead of trusting that God can work through him. Now, was it truly a sin to ask for a king? No. What was sinful, though, was that they would put their trust in a human king and forget that God is their true king. God was going to give them a king anyway. Jesus was coming. And before that, David would be coming, and his line. And even David and some of his descendants failed the Lord in miserable ways sometimes. But God never took his love away from his people. They were his special possession. Sometimes, though, that comes with a price, because God won't just leave us doing the things that we do that stray away from him. He works in our lives to try to chasten us back to himself. And so sometimes, and I'm not saying that all suffering, believe me, there are wonderful people that seem like they get a portion of suffering that I can't explain. But I look at our nation now that's being tested in so many ways, right? We're seeing the fruits of years of trying to forget about God, at least in the public sphere. As long as you keep it private to yourself, well, you can have your space. But we weren't given a nation that was fully secular. We were given as a heritage, a gift, a nation that was pluralistic, that was supposed to respect other faiths, other beliefs, but that God's people, you and me, would never have to be afraid to speak up when we wanted to talk about our love for God and for Christ. And yet we find ourselves more and more in places shying away. And it's difficult. Samuel, of course, had an advantage. He's living in a theocracy. This is not a theocracy that we live in. Some people have said throughout our time, well, this is a Christian nation. I would say, no, it's a nation that's always had many Christians living in it. But it wasn't founded exactly as it would have been a theocracy if it was that. There were always other strains, other parts that fed into it. There were always some people who never knew Christ, who never followed him, who didn't really care about the morality of the scriptures, who came here to make a profit. They came here to make money. Even in our founding, before our founding, when the explorers came, some of them really came to just get wealthy. They didn't all come for the reasons that the pilgrims came to set up a place where God would be honored. And we have to acknowledge that. But there was this wonderful time when at first, and I think there might have been excesses, but there was this time in our history where the leaders really loved God. They knew God. They weren't afraid to stand for their faith. They tried to bring about a fine commonwealth, a place where God would be honored, where his ways would be important. And I think, though, sometimes the Puritans overstepped. They punished people for not agreeing with them. And I'm not sure that was really a good way to go. Samuel was a man of integrity. And so he stands before the people, and he has heard already the people's complaint that his sons have not been men of integrity, that they have taken bribes and they've exploited the people and they've stolen from the people. So there he knew that the people had said, we know that you've been all right, but your sons are corrupt. We don't want them to rule over us. Give us a king like the other nations have, and that's where their mistake was. They wanted a king who would look imposing and powerful, who could lead them out in battle and scare the enemy. But God was there. And time again, God delivered them miraculously so that he confused their enemies, threw them into confusion, and they routed them with less men, with less soldiers fighting, because God was delivering them. And they got into this pattern. They would start to follow God when things got kind of tough. When things were really hard going, they would call out, pray to God for us, send us a deliverer, and God would send a leader. They would get past the crisis, and then they would sink back into what they've been doing before. They would begin to worship these deities that were false, that didn't even exist, that at best were demons. They would follow the Baal and the Ashtoreth, which were false gods. These were the fertility gods of the cult, the male and female fertility gods. And here Samuel says, don't go after nothingness of wasting your energy. And I believe that though we live in this wonderful, great nation, that idolatry is still a sin of the whole West. Really, it's a sin around all the world. And when we start to place our trust, whether it be in government or only in science, and I believe that these are blessings, by the way, I'm not opposed, but what I'm saying is when we start to trust them and we stop praying and seeking God's face, we've set up an idol in our heart. Science has unleashed all kinds of wonderful cures for things, hasn't it? It's great. But when I stand in somebody's room, whether or not at a bedside, whether the doctor's there or not, I always say this: all wisdom comes from you, O Lord. You have shown us this way. We found these things. We may not acknowledge him, but all of the advances in medicine and all these things are a gift that come from God's wisdom. And I often will pray when somebody is seeking healing, saying, Lord, knit together and heal where the surgeon's done their work, that you've designed us with this ability to recover and to heal, where the cells can be restored in so many parts of our bodies. Isn't that an amazing thing? It's not a mindless thing in the universe that we just popped into existence out of nothing. It's truly that God intended for us to be made the way that we are. And when we fail to give him the glory, well, we're no better off than what the people did here. And so I stood at the room of somebody who lost one of her babies, and she was mad at God, but she knew God. She loved God. She said this to me. She says, I want you to talk to God for me. I want you to tell him that I still love him, but I'm really mad at him for taking my baby away. Now, it was a premature birth. The baby's twins came too soon. And by the way, it's not anybody that ever came here. So just so there won't be any confusion about that, there was a family that lost children here too that way. And the doctor stood there, the one who had tried to deliver and save the babies, and said, God does not operate in this universe. And I'm like, God does not operate in this universe? I couldn't challenge the doctor publicly. So what I did was I read from Psalm 139, Lord, you have made us fearfully and wonderfully. You knit us together in our mother's womb. Before a day of our life came forth, you had known our days. And I put that in my prayer after I read it. I was a younger chaplain then, many years back. Anyway, the point that I want to make is that when we only tell part of the truth, when we fail to at least acknowledge God, we fall into the same pattern that they did, but Samuel never did. He was always a faithful remnant of God's people. There were always a people who knew where their blessings came from and who would give God the glory for it. Samuel's mother, Hannah, knew who to turn to. She didn't go to the Ashtaroth or the Baal of that time when she wanted a baby in the worst way. She went to God. She cried out her prayer, and Samuel was the result. And she dedicated him to the Lord. And he was raised in a household that was at best dysfunctional. Eli, I think, still was a person that had known and loved God, but he had grown so away from him and his concerns of upholding. He didn't speak the truth at the level he needed to do. Samuel would not repeat his mistake. And I believe that sometimes we get into conversations where somebody will say, oh, how lucky I am. I'm so lucky. I'm like, well, I don't know about you. I'm not lucky. I'm blessed. And I had someone say, well, I don't like that word. I don't like the word blessed because I don't know that I feel blessed. You know, I don't feel like I'm worthy of that. And I'm like, no, God blesses you even when you are unworthy. And so here he is. Samuel is not afraid, first of all, to stand there and let his life be challenged by everybody who knew him, and he withstood the test, didn't he? I didn't take any bribes. I never took anything for my own profit. I simply served the Lord. That's what he could say, and that's what we need to be able to say every day. And if we failed in the past, we need to give that to God, seek his forgiveness, and then don't do it again. If we do anything dishonest in our transactions, it's not pleasing to God, and he knows it. Samuel knew, because he loved God, I believe, and he knew this God. He had a healthy kind of a fear of God. And he does this bold thing. He challenges the people. He tells them what they probably didn't want to hear. He's not afraid to tell them that they have sinned, that they have tried to put their trust in something that by itself will never save them. But he tells them this. He gives them a wonderful correction. He says, I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds of the Lord that he performed. He starts counting them off. And I wonder if you could do that. Could I ask you now to say, what are the blessings that God has given to you? Or to us as his people, not just the ones about, I had a healing of something in my own personal life, but the great stories that are there of salvation, right? He looked back to their deliverance in the Exodus from Egypt, right? And that's an important part, and that becomes part of our history too, as God's grafted in people. But we have so much more. He sent Jesus into the world to die in our place, to atone for anything that we've done so that we can stand before him one day as though we were Samuel, not in our own righteousness, but bathed and clothed in the righteousness of Christ. That's what God will see if you placed your trust in him. But if you haven't, and you try to hold up your own goodness, your own righteousness as your defense, you'll never stand before him. It's only based on the righteousness of Jesus that he clothes us with. We have to take off the old self with its pride, its arrogance, with its self-righteousness, and be covered in the righteousness of Christ. To stand before him knowing that we are the redeemed, the forgiven. Redeemed being purchased back. We once were slaves to sin, and now we are hopefully servants of righteousness, of God's good ways. He recounts them. He tells the different ones. It didn't just go from the Exodus. They get into trouble again, and they get now surrounded. Moab is on the side where Jordan would be nowadays. Hatzor is in the north, close to Syria. And then the Philistines were in probably that area that we still call the Gaza Strip, where the Palestinians have their land now. They were surrounded on all sides. They were hard-pressed. There are places where it says Gideon and the people were actually doing their threshing of their wheat in a cave. You know, they're supposed to be, and winnowing it in a place that it wasn't going to work so well because they were so afraid of their enemies, and God delivered them with a few hundred people against a much bigger enemy. And so he reminds them of that. And he says, but when Nahash came, that snake that we talked about last Sunday, remember Snake? Remember Snake? Snake, the leader of the Ammonites? And he's saying, I will let you live. I'll stop starving you in this siege that I have, as long as you let me pluck out the right eye of everybody in that city. And God did respond. It was God that confused the enemies. Yes, Saul had the leadership then, and he knew what to do, and it was blessed by God. But we're going to see that Saul starts to take his eyes off of God and do it his own way, and not wait for it. We'll see that in an upcoming passage, or a couple of them. One who started out so well, but at the end, he finished so poorly. But Samuel stays faithful. And when they have a king, he's saying, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to micromanage your king, but whatever God says, I'm going to say to the king. I am going to be still the prophet. I won't be your judge anymore. I won't govern you. You've asked for a king. I gave you a king. You asked for it in a sinful way, but you got your king. God has said this is okay now for you to do. But he better answer to me, to God, through what God reveals. And this is the kind of standards that we should hold our leaders to, that they should follow and do the things that are just and right and good. So then he says, okay, now stand there, stand still. I'm going to call on God to send thunder and lightning and rain. Now, I wouldn't dare to say that, out of my own, right? But he says that, and then he prays, and the rain comes. Now, this is the worst time for the rain to come. It says it was the wheat harvest. That's the dry season in Israel. That's the time that you're supposed to harvest the wheat. But if that wheat gets wet, apparently it can germinate and grow some more and become a much worse product, in what you get. And it could be ruined. It could rot when you harvest it. It's the wrong time of year for this. And so there's a warning that goes to the people, because they've been told that God will chasten them through three different things: famine, pestilence, or through oppression of their enemies if they fail to live up to God's covenant. About, almost 19 years ago now, we got a warning shot, I believe, when the towers were attacked and came down and the Pentagon was hit. And people, there was an upsurge for about 2 or 3 weeks in worship attendance. People went to church that hadn't gone in a long time because they felt threatened. But as soon as things started to settle back down, where were they? A few stayed. And some said, well, because of what happened to those towers, I can't believe a good God would allow that. Well, a good God didn't send those planes into those towers, but he allowed the people to have this warning. What about now? We're living in a pandemic, right? And we know that some people have done wrong things in another country where they kept it to themselves and let it go around the world so that it didn't become contained. Look at the difference between the Ebola, which was contained in its one location or two in a country in Africa, and we sent all kinds of people to help them through that. But they were honest. Integrity needs to be in the public sphere. It needs to be that we have leaders with integrity, and we need to demand that of them, that they're not doing the political thing, that they're doing the right and the good thing. And I'm not going to get into partisan stuff. There are people on both sides that do well and some on both sides that do poorly. But we should hold them always accountable, that they do what they were sent there to do, which was not to live above us. They're still from us. We the people, right? Don't turn aside after empty things. And he gives us the solution. I'll close with this. What does he say? Only fear the Lord. That's the first thing. What do we mean by fear the Lord? Does it mean that we're so afraid that we can't even talk to him? No. It's a reverence. It's a standing in awe of him and knowing there is a business side of God, that if we offend him, we can pay the penalty for that. Serve him faithfully with all your heart. And you know, sometimes it's not with all our hearts, is it? It's sometimes with part of our heart. It's like the person that they're out on, and they're stranded, and they're out and they're swimming in the water, and they're miles away from the shore, and they think they're going to die, and they're like, Lord, you know, if you save me, I'll give all that I have to you. And then now they're only about 2 miles out, and they're like, oh Lord, if you save me, I'll give you half of all that I have. And then they get to be like where they can see the shore, and they're only a couple of 100 yards out, and they're like, Lord, I'll give you a quarter of what I have. And then they forget. That's the kind of half-hearted kind of a thing. It's not about what we give out of just our treasure of money. It's our whole life. He doesn't want a half-hearted faith. He wants your whole self. He wants your whole person. And with that, he'll bring so many blessings. Finally, so we have fear the Lord in a reverent way, serve him faithfully with all your heart, and consider what great things he has done for you. And there again, how do we do that? When we get into something that frustrates us, can we stop, take a deep breath, and say, Lord, let me recount the blessings that you've given me. There was a song that we used to sing, count your blessings, count them one by one, right? Do we do that enough? Or do we think about what we don't have, or what we're afraid of, or what's in front of us that we don't know how we're going to get through it? We'll get through this pandemic, but we remember that God saw us through it in the end. When we look at that person in the mirror staring back at ourselves, it's not whether you've groomed your hair properly or put on your makeup well or whatever. It's what the makeup of your heart is. Amen.